We are back on Morning Line. This is our guest. We're going to try to get into the nuts and bolts of basically what we don't understand, and there's so much on a shooting like this. It's Dr. Anna Settle. She is a licensed psychologist, a forensic psychologist as well, which means sometimes you spend time in prisons.
That's right.
Evaluating inmates or folks when they're about to stand trial to getting some insight into their intellect, their motives. What do you look for?
Well, I'm looking to see if they're competent to stand trial.
Okay.
So can they go through the trial process, and then also mental condition at the time of the crime. Like, for example, with the shooting that just happened, did the person understand that what they were doing was a crime?
Okay. All right. So from where you sit now, and you're not directly involved with what's happening there, but you're nice enough to come on as an expert in this field, kind of talk. When you saw this yesterday, and unfortunately we keep seeing these, we're going to look at it from both sides, both from the victim side and the grieving now, and the other side. I'm just curious, when you heard this story, what kind of went through your mind from your perspective? What questions were you asking, or what did you take note of?
The first thought that crossed my mind is, wow, this is the 11th or 12th school shooting this year. So this is becoming much more prevalent.
And I worry because of that, people are being desensitized to it.
That's right.
If you can believe that you can be desensitized to a school shooting, do you think that could be happening?
It's certainly happening when we see it on the news and when our children are just assuming that it's another school shooting that's happened.
Right. All right. I mean, yeah, I read something else where some researchers have said it's come to the point where there's almost a shooting of some type at a school since 2013 every week.
Yes.
New York Times reported. You and I read the Times.
That's
anyway,
right.
And keep in mind now, a shooting doesn't necessarily mean someone's been injured. These can be suicides, which of course you take your own life. This can be a gun just going off hitting no one, or it can be a shooting.
Right.
But one a week since 2013. Goodness gracious. Now, with regard to the suspect, let's start with that, because I think a lot of people have some interest in that. It's about the victims, I know, folks, but right now some of the big gaps are around the suspect. They have a 15-year-old in custody.
Right.
They have not told us much, so a lot of people are theorizing on social media. He's a student in school. At some point, would you imagine right now in custody, is he being evaluated yet?
Yes.
Would he already, right off the bat, they get him there? Now, he may already have an attorney appointed, but what typically would happen in this case with a young man being brought into custody the day after a shooting like this?
They're going to question him, and they're going to get details about what happened. So initially, he's going to go through an extensive interview, and his parents will probably be interviewed as well.
Could he decline to answer questions? He could certainly, right?
Yes.
He's charged.
Yes.
And then would these be questions from law enforcement officials like the FBI and the like, or would there also be a psychologist like you brought in?
Likely both.
Okay, now if you were brought in, what would you be looking at with him? What kind of questions do you think you might ask him, knowing what you know about this case?
Well, I would be asking about the details of what led up to the crime, and then I would want to understand, was there some sort of mental illness that was impacting the way that he was thinking? Was he psychotic? Did he understand what he was doing? Were there some sort of delusional beliefs going on that led him to follow through on something because he thought that somebody was going to injure him? Those are the kinds of questions that I would be asking.
And would that be asking of him or his parents, or both?
Of him.
Of him.
Yes.
So, but I'm wondering, if someone who's delusional like that and you start asking him those questions, they may not be aware of it, but would one of your first questions be, okay, if he's admitting to it, why did you do this? Or what led you to show up at the school with a gun? And you're asking him that, and you're just letting him talk.
Right. And I should throw in the caveat that most of the time people are not psychotic, and they do understand when these kinds of crimes are happening. So the insanity defense, to get off on that, it's pretty rare.
Very rare. Very rare. Okay, so that being said then, again, we don't know in this case, and law enforcement has not said, but already on social media and everywhere else in this vacuum, they're speculating. What type of things, in your experience, maybe in other cases, not talking about this one, can drive a young individual to do something like this?
So we've talked about bullying.
Bullying that's one for sure, right?
Sure, yes.
Okay.
Mental illness, for sure. But those two things aren't necessary, I mean, there are certainly signs that we're going to see. I don't think we're ever going to have a student that has shown no signs of violence whatsoever that comes into school and does something like this. So I'm not placing blame on parents or administrators. Administrators are saying anyone's been remiss, but typically someone with this kind of profile, there have been signs.
Okay, and that's the next point.
Yes.
There had to be, and so many of these cases oftentimes, it's just rare that someone's like, I completely never saw that coming. You do some digging and all of a sudden there were all these red flags. You think it's very likely there was possibly something in his recent past that might have clued you in. And then the question is, how do you know if that is going to drive someone to become a murderer, or, all right, it's just kind of like, yeah, there's a flag there, but that doesn't mean he's going to kill someone.
Right. Oftentimes, people who commit these kinds of crimes will verbalize that they're going to do it. And I think sometimes parents and administrators tend to minimize because they don't think that that is going to happen. They think it's so egregious, this kid couldn't actually follow through on that.
Right.
And so sometimes we ignore those signs.
Gosh, I thought we were past that.
Yeah, I know,
because there's
right?
been so many now, anything. I mean, you wonder if coming up in this young man's past, I mean, what if he had put together a hit list last year or something and nothing came of it? Again, we don't know that. I'm just throwing that out as an example. I mean, because you said, and you're right, we don't blame anyone right now, but if it comes out that there were some really clear, obvious warning signs that were ignored and they've been documented, heck yeah, someone needs to be held accountable beyond just the shooter.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah, the other part of it is our mental health system is not perfect. And so unless he was outright stating, I am going to do this and I'm going to follow through on it, and here is my plan, then there aren't necessarily actions that we can take to keep the kid out of school if we've just seen some signs of violence, but not necessarily heard that he plans to do this.
It's a good point. That always reminds me when we talk about this, that Tom Cruise movie Minority Report. I don't know if you ever saw it, but the whole idea of they had someone who could predict whether or not someone was going to commit a crime and they'd arrest him before it happened.
Right.
You don't do that in America.
No.
Okay, so that's how that plays out. Listen, let's take a phone call or two real quick here as we make our way through it. We'll go to Joe. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hi, Joe.
This whole situation is getting confusing to me because it seems like people are getting to where they're oblivious to this stuff because it's going on so regular. Even the students, I don't, you know, our society and social media, I think, is driving a lot of this stuff because these kids don't have, most of the time, where it's either at home or they've got too much time on their hands or what. But it seems to be driving these young people to do these things. You know, we just had last night here in Nashville a 15-year-old that killed somebody.
Right.
It's, I don't know. I don't know if there's a real good answer for it. I don't know. I do agree with the psychologist about one thing, that I think most of the time these people know what they're doing. Why they do it, I can't answer that. I don't think she can answer that. But I think they're fully aware of what they're doing.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, with young people, like, and I agree with what Joe was saying there. Just I don't know if it's a desensitization. I don't know if it's video games. I don't know if it's social media. I mean, there's still idiots out there that try to disclaim that Sandy Hook even happened. Yeah, if you don't believe it happened, you're an idiot. So, I mean, the bottom line is there's so much out there that kind of can confuse people or desensitize them.
Yes, and kids are exposed to so much through social media and through media in general. You know, when we were younger, we didn't have access to all of these news stories, you know, about wars and other, excuse me, violent acts that are happening. So they are desensitized because they hear it so frequently.
Yeah, and then in terms of access, you just wonder, one big question that's going to be hanging out there is, where did he get the weapon?
Right.
Is there easier access to guns? Was the weapon in the household? Did he buy it somewhere? Did he steal it from someplace? It seems like not only then do you have, you know, some of these problems that these kids are having in their minds, but when bullying's always been around. But in the old days, maybe it was resolved with a fist fight.
Right.
Now, if someone feels that they're just being overwhelmed, and they're being overwhelmed on social media, which can be brutally cruel,
Right.
they get a gun. And the solutions, I have no idea what it is, except to watch for the flags and act on it.
Right.
But you just said it's hard to do that.
It really is hard to identify.
So you're saying, yeah, you can't stop it then.
Right, but I would say that we have to take it much more seriously than we tend to do.
Okay, and you're talking about everything from law enforcement to teachers maybe getting special training to really look not just for bullying, but to see if there's someone who fits, I guess. Okay, that's the thing is there a profile?
There is not one particular profile.
Dang it.
Wouldn't it be nice if there was?
I mean, if there was a profile where you could let teachers know these are the 8 or 9 factors that maybe if you see 6 of them in someone, that is something you need to take action on. There has to be, though, there have to be some common threads between these shooters. I mean, bullying has to be one of them. Being a loner has to be one of them. These unto themselves don't make you a killer. You know, some of your social interaction. I mean, aren't there things?
There are some warning signs. So if you have a kid who has oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder and those types of disorders, I mean, it's apparent when a child is acting out, or when a child has no empathy. You know, if they're trespassing, if they are being cruel to animals, if they seem to just have no empathy whatsoever, certainly that's a huge red flag. And so if they have some sort of mental disorder that is driving it, that certainly is much more identifiable.
Right. And boy, I'll tell you, sometimes in night court, you see these young kids brought in there for adult crimes, and they're just, it's like stone cold. And they're 15 or 16, no empathy, no really caring, whatever. It's just they've at 16 to have completely lost hope.
Yes.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. And I would say, too, if there's a sudden shift in mood, you know, if a kid is normally engaging, you know, they are social, and then all of a sudden they tend to start withdrawing, or you see maybe they're more manic, so they're much more energetic and they seem to be more impulsive. Those are also signs that you can look for. Okay.
And I've had a chance to interview some of these teen shooters that have shot up schools in the past, and sadly there have been others in this area. Sometimes lack of sleep and obviously some interaction of drugs sometimes played a role. Whatever, they were in some kind of emotional stress, lost sleep, ended up, you know, almost not becoming themselves.
Yes.
Depression fits into that as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and sometimes kids are under the impression that if they are under the influence of a substance, then they won't be held accountable, that they're not culpable. But the law is written so that, you know, that does not qualify you for the insanity defense.
Okay. And unless you are defending yourself against an actual attack, bullying, as awful and as real as it is absolutely no excuse for something like this in a legal defense.
That's right, yes.
I mean, he can't say, well, I was bullied, so I went and did this. No.
Right. I mean, it may have some impact on the sentence that's given, but it's certainly not going to determine whether or not somebody is guilty or innocent.
Okay, let's go to Margaret next. Hi, Margaret.
Hello.
Hey, go ahead.
I am doing great.
Hey.
I just want to first say to all the families in Marshall County, my heart goes out to you. Next thing I want to say is, my heart goes out to the family of the young man that done the shooting. You know he's hurting. There had to be a sign. There had to be red flags everywhere. I know my son was bullied in school, and I don't know if this is his situation, but there was a deaf ear turned to my son's. I went to the school numerous times. And the only thing I could come back with is, if you wanted to stop, take care of it yourself. Now, that may be the wrong thing, but he did that one day. And I got a call from the school saying he was suspended.
Yeah. Well, that's why now schools, almost every school in this school had an SRO, a school resource officer. Usually they're officers specially trained through the sheriff's department that are law enforcement on the school grounds, and hopefully that's someone you could go to. Yeah, that's the problem when these students choose to take care of it themselves. In the old days with a fist fight, maybe it did, but not anymore. You know, tons of unconfirmed reports on topics, okay, out there. There's one report out there circulating, just, you know, she's talking about his family, that his mother responded to the reports of the shooting, going out there to see if her son was hurt, and then realized it was her son who did the shooting and was just devastated. Now, that's not confirmed at this point. There's also other unconfirmed reports about the status of his family and who they are. We'll find out more, but I mean, parents can be oblivious to this too, I suppose, if they miss the warning signs.
Nobody believes that it's going to be something that extreme.
Yeah. That's probably, you know what, you better start believing it now.
Right.
Because it's happening every dang day. Not just at a school, but every day. I'm down there doing the news every morning, and there is a shooting. If there's just one shooting, it's a slow morning. And a lot of times it involves teens. It's bad. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more of your phone calls. Look, a bunch of people want to talk to you. We'll be right back after this.